Hello, everyone, and welcome to this InfraNodus webinar with the special guest Sid Dadla, who will be presenting his InfraNodus LLM workflows. And this whole webinar is going to be about using InfraNodus in your LLM workflows with the MCP server in your favorite tools like Claude Code or ChatGPT. And we will demonstrate some of the workflows that you can apply in your everyday life or projects, and also open it up to the online chat and questions and answers. So if you have anything that you would like to ask, also let us know. We will be waiting now for some people to join in. Please let me know if you can hear me well. You can use chat for it so that we're sure that we can hear each other well. Okay, great. So the sound is going through, the image is on. Use the chat if you would like to ask anything, and then we will be sometimes stopping the presentation and answering questions that you have. And also we have a Q&A as well, which you can also use. So you can use both chat and the Q&A. And maybe I will, in the meanwhile, introduce Sid. So Sid is actually someone I met because he's using InfraNodus. And when we talked, I really liked his way of using the tool, actually. I find his whole approach is very inspiring. He's using it for something really amazing, as he will share. I also like how he thinks about the whole field. I think a lot of people actually will really enjoy it as well and find it inspiring. And then, yeah, we had this idea that it would be great to do a webinar because we thought that it would be also great to share it with the other InfraNodus users. And I think a lot of people actually use it that way. So maybe it will also demonstrate how, we're all using it in kind of like similar ways. And I think, yeah, that Sid's workflow is especially interesting because he's combining so many different elements and tools, and InfraNodus is one of them in the stack. And he's actually applying it to real business use case. So I find it's quite interesting because then you can actually see how you can implement it in something very practical. And maybe some of you also are using it in a similar way. So please also feel free to share it while we will be doing this presentation in the chat. And also, if you have any questions to Sid, let him know. We will also keep on checking the chat message and the Q&A section in case you have any questions or if you have anything to add. And the way that we will structure the webinar today is that I will introduce first like the main concepts of InfraNodus, and then how you can actually use it together with LLMs through the MCP server. Just skim through some really interesting use cases I find are very interesting and helpful personally to me. And then I will ask Sid to also present his use case so that he can demonstrate how he uses InfraNodus as well. And we will make occasional stops so we can answer your questions, which I will be monitoring in the chat, and also run some polls as well so that you can tell us about how you use MCP servers, how you use InfraNodus, and we will share the results with everyone, of course, anonymously. But like that, you can also learn a little bit more about what kind of people are joining this webinar and what kind of people use InfraNodus and what they're working on. So maybe Sid, do you want to say a couple of words to introduce yourself real quick, and then we will get into the first part of the webinar?
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks for inviting me onto the webinar, Dimitri, and I'm excited to be presenting. I was talking to Dimitri when we were just getting on that I think the InfraNotice community is amongst the most interesting and intelligent of all the Discord groups that I'm a part of. I run into some of you guys on other servers as well, and it's always in some interesting rabbit holes. So I'm excited to see and get your guys' feedback on how I've been applying InfraNodus to just both my personal life and actually, at several different factories that I'm working at. So yeah, real privilege to be on here, and I'm excited to get into it.
That's great. Thank you, Sid, for this, and also a real pleasure to have you on. Tom Harley is asking to ask something, I think. Okay, he raised his hand. But yeah, if you want to ask something, just feel free to send it in the chat and then we can answer later. All right, so I will shift to the first part where we demonstrate how InfraNodus can be used in your favorite LLM workflow. So you all already probably know what InfraNodus is. It's a text network, a knowledge graph visualization and analysis tool. And unlike other tools, it actually applies network metrics to the graphs that it builds so that you can extract some really interesting insights, like what are the main topics, what are the main concepts, how they relate to one another. And also one of the most loved feature is the content gaps, where you identify which clusters could be better connected. And that allows you to generate interesting ideas between those clusters and to make new bridges. And you can do that either by looking at the graph or using the built-in AI, which can generate research questions and then respond to them for you. So that's kind of how it works in a nutshell. And because it's very interesting to kind of use this approach in many different contexts, what we built last year was the MCP server, which allows you to plug all these workflows that are available inside InfraNodus into your favorite LLM. And you probably already know what MCP servers are. I will actually make a poll now just to see if people are using MCP servers. So you will see now uh, like an online poll just on your screen. So you can answer this question and then I will share the results with you so we understand a little bit if people know what MCP servers are and if they're using them. But in general, what MCP servers allow you to do is to connect any application to your favorite LLM. So for example, if you use Claude, like I do here, and you have a chat, for example, with your Claude, you could actually get some of the InfraNodus logic and workflows directly inside your favorite LLM. So that's really great because you can be, for example, working on content creation or researching a certain topic, and you can easily ask Claude to just connect to InfraNodus and to retrieve content gaps, for instance, which I was showing you earlier on. And it will automatically get them from the text that you're analyzing or your existing graphs and then generate an interesting insight based on those content gaps. So it provides some kind of structural insights to your LLM. And how I like to think about it is that it's basically guiding your LLM's thinking throughout the whole discourse. So if this InfraNodus graph is the map, then if you just look at the map, you can already get an idea of what this context or what this text is about, what are the main topics inside and how they're related. But what InfraNodus does on top of that is that it provides some workflows for you to navigate through this map. So it's a bit like your GPS in knowledge, right? And depending on your objectives, you can actually use it in different ways. So for example, for some people, if they just want to get an overview, they can use this main topics functionality. And this is exactly what's also available inside the MCP server. There is this generate topical overview tool, which allows you to basically ask your LLM to generate an overview of a certain text or a certain topic, and then it will provide exactly what you see on the screen, but in text format, and then feed it back to your LLM and it will have access to that information. But if your intention, for instance, is to generate new ideas, then it's going to highlight the gaps like that and then feed them back to your LLM. So your LLM will have access to that additional structural information about the text. It will know what's missing. And so you kind of guide LLM's attention to those gaps, which it would normally not consider, because the way that it's normally made, if you're not using any special prompts, is that it's trying to converge towards the center. My last video on YouTube was about that normally when you ask LLM to generate something in relation to certain discourse or text, it's going to try to settle on the central concepts because it wants to generate highly probable continuation of your text and to generate really kind of generic ideas, but not because it wants to be generic, but because it wants to fit the context which you're providing to it. So the advantage of using the InfraNodus MCP server in your LLM is that instead it identifies those content gaps, so the clusters which are not well connected, and then it gives that guidance sort of to your LLM and tells it, okay, don't try to focus on the main concepts that you see in this text. Don't try to continue it in the most predictable way. Try to focus on what's missing. And this is one way of seeing what is missing. And then another mode that InfraNodus has, for instance, is that it focuses on a smaller cluster at the periphery of the graph. For example, something like this here, right? Like this one is at the periphery, and then it has the special transcend mode, which is, by the way, also available in the built-in AI chat. And then it tries to sort of jump out from the bubble of your thinking and trying to generate something that would extend this discourse beyond this graph. So this is like a really nice visual way to understand how it works, but this is also exactly what it does to LLM when it's providing this additional structural information so that it can surprise itself by the answers that it is giving to you. And so somebody is asking in the Q&A if you would use the MCP to InfraNodus on the current conversation with Claude to understand better. Yeah, you can do that. I'll also show you how you can do that. And now I'm going to share the results of the poll. So most of the people actually say that they use MCP servers, but only half of them actually. So in fact, I'll share the results now, so you should be seeing them on your screen right now. So actually, half of the people don't use MCPs in their workflows, but almost everyone knows what MCPs are, so this is great. Then I can also demonstrate to you how you can set it up and why it's useful for you. If you want, you can write actually in the chat why you're not using them, if you know what they are, if you're using something else, if you're using APIs directly, for instance, instead, or if you just think they're not useful or you haven't found the ones that you find useful. So I would be really curious to know why you're not using MCPs, because half of the people don't use them. Okay, so let's move on. And yeah, I just wanted to show you some really practical use cases of how you can use these MCP servers inside your workflows. So for example, here I have a chat which I had with Claude Web in this case a few days ago, where I was basically thinking about a certain concept that's called landscape reading model, which is it's kind of like a simple concept that basically says that when we read something, the concepts that we're reading at the very moment of reading become activated like a landscape. And it's related to the notion of short-term memory, also how we keep our attention on what we're reading at the moment and how it gradually forms into the understanding of a text. And that is because some of the tenets of this theory I used in the InfraNodus itself, how it actually represents information and the sliding window it uses to represent this graph. So it's a little bit like of a reflection of what happens in short-term memory as we read through texts, but over a period of time. And so while I was writing this text, at some point, I have this like normal discussion with Claude, because at this point I don't even need to use InfraNodus. I just wanted to get like a general idea of how I can talk about this concept in the most generic way. And after I think a few prompts, I reached some milestone where I have a text which is prepared for me by Claude on the topic. But then, of course, like if I actually use this text, it's going to be quite generic. So this is where the InfraNodus tools come in, because that's where I can start using the different tools from InfraNodus that would allow me to then somehow improve the quality of this content. So I will actually show you what I had first. I visualized this first version inside InfraNodus also, just to show you how it looked like. So you see, it's kind of like it's really focused on this idea of landscape reading, basically on the main concepts I was talking about. Uh, Something about memory, something about text, but not too much. And then after InfraNodus interventions, we still have those central concepts, but now we have much more about the readers and their perception and concepts and how you simultaneously hold them in your mind. Also, this whole cluster on memory limits got expanded as well, working memory. And there's a few more topics, and the text actually became much more interconnected and structured much better. And the way that it works was basically that at some point where I reached a limit of the model itself, because I thought, okay, this is something where InfraNodus can start help me. I asked it, all right, so you have this text, which I wrote on the landscape reading model, which you wrote on the landscape reading model, and then now find me some gaps here. And look what InfraNodus does here. Claude actually requests a list of available tools, and then it understands that it can, in fact, use the InfraNodus tool. And by the way, here is a good example because it failed a few times. I think there was some connectivity issue. But what's great about MCPs is that even if it fails, it's going to try another one and another time. And then finally, when it works, and usually it's just like a few iterations, maybe it made a wrong request, maybe the server was not available at that point. But basically, eventually, and it was only a few seconds, it made a request where it sent my original text to InfraNodus to the tool that is called generate content gaps. So I asked it to generate some gaps. Claude understood that it has this tool from InfraNodus available to it that's called generate content gaps, sent a request. So it's a little bit the same as if I went into InfraNodus here and added a new graph, but instead of doing that manually, it does it for me automatically. And then as you can see, it receives the response with the list of content gaps. And these content gaps are then integrated into the conversation. So Claude has this additional structural insight about what's missing in this text, right? So everything that you see now when I do this show content gaps, this is the information that Claude received, that you have gaps in between those clusters. And because it already has the context of the conversation, then it integrates information about those clusters into the response. And then it got some really interesting ideas here. For instance, it said that I could connect some concept of cone cluster to structural integration. So it was really actually good technical insights on how I can make this whole discourse more coherent and more connected. And you see, it provided me a list of those gaps. And then actually it made me think of a certain idea. So then I continue interacting with it in a normal way, not using InfraNodus at this point because I want to elaborate on a certain concept that it identified that was missing. And then I rephrased it myself because I want also my own text and my own voice to be inside. And then it rephrased it in a really nice way. And then I added my own content again, and then it became part of the article. So then we continue having a discussion. And then at some point, I get stuck again with Claude. And then I ask it, could you generate some interesting ideas from all of this? And then Claude is basically understanding that, okay, now I can use generate research ideas tool. So it makes a request with that text, which we are analyzing. It tells it which model to use. It tells it use several gaps and use this transcend mode. So exactly what I showed you, when instead of focusing on the gaps, it takes a cluster that's underrepresented at the periphery and then kind of tries to jump out behind it. And this is why, by the way, it's also really nice to have the visualization available, because you actually understand everything that's happening visually. We're not just black boxing it, everything that happens, you can actually visualize it and understand what the model is doing here. So InfraNodus received that request, and then based on this mode of identifying the clusters which could be expanded further beyond the limits of the network, it generates a response here, which was actually more interesting than the interpretation that Claude gave. So this is why, in fact, I went directly inside the InfraNodus response, and I used this idea which it provided here to then develop my text further. So that was also really interesting. Sometimes Claude can make a nice interpretation of InfraNodus results. Sometimes I use the InfraNodus results directly. This is why, by the way, I also like to use this AI box inside InfraNodus, because sometimes it's a bit more creative and there is more adjustments that you can make and you can control it better as well. And so, yeah, this is how it generated some more ideas. So as you can see, it's really like a process that I'm going through together with AI. Instead of having AI write everything for me, I just make it outline the main structure. And then I use the graph or the InfraNodus tools to then navigate through that structure and ask it to develop certain gaps or certain clusters, which either I find interesting or that I find are underdeveloped. And then the last thing that I do, which I think some of the people might want to actually do first, but for me it was more interesting to talk about this topic first and to then analyze how I can embed it into the general discourse. And this is why I do search optimization here. So I basically say, all right, now we have this text. Can you please find what people search for in relation to this topic? Because if I write about something and I use words or terms that no one else is using, then no one is going to see that article. So I also run this analysis, and InfraNodus also has this tool because it's basically a full stack that allows you to go from brainstorming to writing to actually analyzing how you can promote your content. Because I also experienced it myself a lot of times that, you write about something and then no one is reading it. So you also want to understand what people are searching for in relation to the subject. And so Claude knows that, all right, there is a special tool that is available as part of the InfraNodus MCP server called Generate CO Report. So it's Search Engine Optimization Report. And basically what it does is that it analyzes what people search for, what they find on Google, and if there are any gaps between what they search for and what they find, and also what are the search queries with the high number of searches. And for example, here it realized that, okay, if I'm talking about working memory, I should also talk about this guy Badley, because he developed a model of working memory, and I never mentioned him in this text. So if people are searching for that a lot, and I want them to find what I wrote, which is like a take on working memory, I would say, then probably it's nice to add something there, because both search engines and LLMs, they will consider it to be relevant to this more popular concept. So it becomes almost like a way to infiltrate your ideas into the general discourse. And I say infiltrate because what I'm talking about in that article is very niche, is very esoteric almost, but I want it to be read. So that's why I need to connect it to the bigger concepts. And this is exactly what's happening here. You see it came up with the reference to the scientist Badly. Then also it said, actually, you can also connect it to ADHD. And that was a really great idea because it allowed me to also demonstrate how ADHD is just a different way of navigating the graph, because neurodivergent people, they just think differently. They actually tend to make more connections between the clusters. So for example, for them, it may be not as interesting to others to see content guests, but for them, it could be useful to see the clusters, because then it allows them to maintain focus on them and to also connect them in different ways as well. But this was a really interesting connection that I was missing. And then some other stuff. So basically I asked it, okay, let's add some of the concepts that I found were useful for this text, like ADHD, cluster, and the working memory one. And then you see I'm developing this text further. And so basically in the end, I come to a really good result where I have a really full text with a lot of different ideas inside. I'm going to link to it after in the chat. In fact, I'm going to send the link right now. This is the final result, but that's for the support portal. So it's for technical use because mainly support portal is queried through our web chat. And then I will make another article where I will basically rewrite it myself and publish it on our main Nodus Labs website. But you can see the text and you can see that it's quite full and it's touching on a lot of ideas. And then one last thing I want to show you, which I find really exciting in this workflow, is that once I generated this final text, right, that was not enough for me. I thought, okay, now I want to use the different ways of thinking that I'm interested in and to somehow enhance this text with these different ways of thinking, or see how I can apply, let's say, Ray Dalio's principles, Or I have this even movement practice, which is called 8OS, which is based on adaptivity, resilience, fluidity. So I thought, how can we apply that framework to what I'm talking about? Is there any relations? So what InfraNodus MCP server does, and it's a relatively new feature, so if you already use it, you might not know about it, but you might find it super interesting, is that if you have a graph inside InfraNodus, you can make it public. And basically, we have so-called expert graphs where you create ontology for a certain topic. So, for example, I have this expert account where I have 6 different graphs which are public. One of them is InfraNodus Support. So this graph is basically explaining how InfraNodus works and has this ontology knowledge graph that shows what you could use it for, what are the different concepts, how they're related, and so on. Then I have one on Chinese medicine. I have Ray Dalio principles. I have machine learning. I have even Taro graph, if I want to go a little bit esoteric. And I have the graph on my movement practice, which is based on somehow like applying dynamical systems theory to interactions, I could say in general terms. And then I said, okay, so why don't you apply the public graph of that account, Ray Dalio principles, to this text and see how we can apply all this knowledge to organizations, because that's what Ray Dalio is also talking about, like the economical and business context. And it's great because I had this highly specific text, and now I'm saying, okay, consult that expert Ray Dalio's brain, so to say, and try to see how you can enhance this discourse with Ray Dalio's ideas. So this is exactly what InfraNodus is doing here. It's making a prompt where it basically summarizes the question that it has that is based on the text that I've just written. And then it says, send it to this graph, Ray Dalio principles, from the user expert. So it's a public graph, and that makes it available. And then generate an interesting response for me. And then actually Claude got really excited. It's not as excited usually as ChatGPT, so I liked that it got excited this time because I think it lies less to you. It's not trying to be as supportive as ChatGPT, but even Claude got excited and it said, look, we actually use the same term already in the text that Ray Dalio is also talking about. And then it kind of mapped this whole discourse on how you can apply it to organizations and business. So it was really great. And I said, okay, let's actually add a section on that. And then I asked it to even consult my dynamical systems theory movement graph, which is talking about escalation, de-escalation, and intersubjective interactions. So that could be like a very esoteric connections, but because it uses the notion of variability, in fact, it picked something really useful up in that graph where it said, okay, it's not only about finding gaps and looking at the periphery, but also the variability of your navigation through this knowledge. So you see, it's like you actually can get inspired from many different ways of thinking. And sometimes the most unlikely connections will be the most interesting ones, because in that case, you would say, how can you apply movement practice to thinking about the way we read? But you actually can. There's a lot of wisdom in how movement practices are structured. If any of you have been practicing Tai Chi, for example, you know that it's not for nothing that it's called martial art. There's a lot of wisdom that was collected through centuries and passed on through generations. And you can actually easily apply it to anything and get some really interesting ideas. So it's really like using those graphs, those expert graphs, to create some other navigational pattern that you could apply then to those texts. So you see, it's like a full sort of stack here, from writing to then finding how you can optimize it for search engines, and then finally consulting some experts to then generate some interesting insights from those experts and enrich the text further. I think then I went on a banger and I even tried to apply Chinese medicine to this text, and that was also pretty interesting. And then it even gave me a summary of how useful it was from all those different approaches. So yeah, this is kind of an overview of how you can use the MCP server. If you have any questions about it, now let me know. I think I will just read some of the questions you already posted in the chat and in the Q&A section, answer them, and then I will pass it on to Sid. And in the meanwhile, let me also see if we can make another poll on your favorite AI tools. So if you can answer that, I'm sharing the poll now. It's basically which are your favorite AI tools, or what's your favorite AI product that you use most of the time. And then I will share the results with you as well. And now we'll just read some of the questions we have in the chat. So let me scroll up and see what's happening here. So Nigel, for example, is saying that he used MCPs a couple of times and found it interesting, but still need to better understand Infernotus, as clicking on buttons seems to develop different answers within Infernotus. So yeah, it's because the interface gives you somehow more affordances and you can control it better. So I would always say it's better to learn how to use it and then actually click around to get some really specific insights. But the advantage of using the MCP server is that you don't need to use the interface. So if you find it too complex, or if this visual representation or metaphor of networks is not something that you relate to, or you don't know how to interpret them, then actually MCP server is really useful here, because it will provide you sort of like the main insights that you would get from the networks here. And then Lars is asking if there's a recording available. I think it's recording. I hope that we will have it recorded. If it's recorded, then we will post it on the YouTube channel of Nodus Labs. And then Nigel is saying you're getting the feedback or response from Infernotus in the Claude text, but how are you then visualizing it in Infernotus? Is there a link Claude provides to see the graph? Well, you actually, by default, it's not saving anything. So it's using it in the private mode where it's not even logging what you're asking, but you can ask it to generate a graph. So it's just all in memory, it sends a text to Infernotus, Infernotus sends the graph back, but it's not saved at this point. If you want it to be saved, you actually have a tool inside and you can ask it, okay, now save this graph, and then it will provide you a link and you will click the link. And if you're logged in, you will be able to see the graph. But you don't need it at this point, really, like in this workflow, which I just demonstrated, where you're developing something. There is no reason for you to really have the graph, but if you do want to have it and then to kind of consult it in the meanwhile, then yes, you can do it. Or you can also do it manually, like I showed you where I had the first version of the article. I simply downloaded the file, which it provided me here, somewhere at the beginning of the conversation, I think it was, and then I just visualized it as a graph myself. So yeah, you have these different ways to do it. And then Lars is saying that for someone new to knowledge graphs, ontology, etc., it becomes a bit meta-meta when the subject matter is also about knowledge graphs and reasoning methods. It's harder to see which parts are the LLM or Infernotus MCP giving assistance based on these principles. All right, yeah, that's a good point. I have a tendency to demonstrate things on the subjects that I'm interested in, but you're right that maybe to make it more accessible, I need to talk about something that is a little bit more general so that everyone can understand if the insights really make sense. So that's a good point. And then Elio is saying, where does it get CO data for the keywords, search volume and stuff? So yeah, we basically use data providers, several of them. One of them is, for example, data for CO, which basically all CO tools use. You can check it yourself. It's pretty cheap. They also have their own MCP server, but it's not then integrated into this whole content creation flow. So the advantage of using it inside Infernotus is that all the tools are interconnected. So then it knows exactly how to use the information that it obtained on the search volume to actually generate an interesting result. And also here, if we find that there is some other data source which is available for your specific query, then we'll use that. So it's kind of tool agnostic in this case. Hassan is saying this is a lot very fast. Okay. This is why we'll have the recording. Then what are the external expert network examples? What would be knowledge graph of this webinar transcript look like? That's a good point. We should actually transcribe it and visualize. And then Tom Diaz is saying, is there a link to the Infernotus Discord group? Is there a link to ontologies of experts? How I can create one for myself? So yeah, that's a good point. I will show you the expert graphs where you can find them. If you go to the main site of Infernotus, you have this a page where it says, here are some examples of the graphs of reasoning ontologies. So there's one on Chinese medicine, adaptive resilience, Roydalian principles. And if you click on reasoning ontologies, then you can see some of them and you can see the examples. And then, so I'll send the link now to the chat. Like this, you can open that page. And there are more examples there. And then we have a help article So if you go here on reasoning ontologies use case, then it explains how you can actually create this graph, what the whole workflow is. And when you open InfraNodus itself, if you go to the apps page and you create a new graph, you can actually create a knowledge graph or AI generated graph. So you can generate an ontology automatically using AI, or you can also create your own ontology manually by using wiki links. Because then it just makes it more precise. You could also use plain text, but I recommend to use wiki links because then you can even import your Obsidian data. And we have a link here to the ontology creator GPT. If you have a text which you just want to automatically convert, then you can just open it in your chat GPT and then generate the text, which you then paste here and then generate a graph from it. So this is how you would use the ontology creator. And just a few more questions. So would you use the MCP to Infernotus on the current conversation in Claude to understand better? So I think we had it already. Yes. Um, what is Infernotus working on here in this demo? The article you mentioned or the conversation itself? It's the article, yeah. So it's both the article and the conversation in some cases. And then Mo is saying, what is an effective architecture for using Infernotus as a thinking layer on top of a multi-agent environment like Perplexity Computer? So the agents iteratively discover weakly connected topics and turn them into new research or product experiments. MCP API, I would say MCP because MCP has a description of how you use the actual tools. And if you just feed the API to it, it could work, but you would then rely on the API docs, which we do have here. Now there is a new page with them. So if you go to InfraNodus API, you actually have this whole page that explains all the different requests, but you are kind of relying then on your AI to interpret what would be the best request to make depending on your situation. And the advantage of MCP server is that it already has the specific tools that are catering for specific use cases. So it's just that you have less space there for an error. And yeah, you can actually generate the results faster. And now I'm going to share also the results of the poll, the favorite AI tools. So most of the people use Claude Desktop. That's the champion. I will share so you can see it right now. So yeah, Claude is what most people use, but some people use also Chat GPT, Cursor, and also other tools. If you want to share which other tools you use in the chat, that will be great. Then Gregor is asking that he can see that Infernotus is using GPT-5. Can I use a different model if I bring my own API key? You can actually use any model. So the MCP server will accept like any of the latest models. So you don't need to bring your own key. And also the chat inside Infernotus as well. You can choose the model that you use, Gemini, Grok, or Claude, for example. Here you can see the list of the models available. And we always add the latest models here. And then I think I answered all the questions now that you had so far. So I think it's a good moment to pass it on to Sid so that he demonstrates his really nice and amazing workflow. And I will be monitoring the chat and Q&A. And at some point when Sid feels like it, we can make a pause and then answer some of the questions. So on to you, Sid.
Awesome, thank you. And I second what someone in the chat said about any session with Dimitri is sort of like drinking from a fire hose because it's so much information that I definitely find myself very thankful that one, I can take the transcript, put it into a knowledge graph, and then use AI to help understand it. Just I think it's been one of the best, like, happy coincidences of my personal and professional career is stumbling into InfraNodus. So I'm just requesting if I can share, Dimitri. And as soon as you do that, I'll get started. And yeah, the chat will have to excuse me if I sound a little too excited, but yeah, it's gonna get wild. I put on my adventure hat just because we're gonna be going down some deep rabbit holes today, I think. Um, so this is just my website. It's just a wait list for right now because we're mainly less looking for customers and more looking for partners who want to sort of work with us long term. I think the entire augmentation of an enterprise with artificial intelligence and autonomous systems is not a short-term project. It's going to be at least a year-long project to really transform a business from the ground up. I found InfraNodus initially when I was trying to solve a problem with vector databases, oddly enough, where, storing information within a vector database is doable, but then curating the information so it stays high value over time was just a big pain point. And that's really where InferNotus stood out, is Dimitri's tool really allows you to like pick out very specific portions of the graph and like remove information or identify where there are gaps and then, sort of work towards filling that in. Whereas any standard vector database, like you're just sort of throwing information in there. And the curation aspect is, I don't know, I don't actually even know how people are curating regular vector databases because there's not really a great mechanism for doing that. Whereas with Dimitri's tool, InfraNodus, like you can visually go in and like, really curate and clean up the information, which just keeps it high value and we all know just like the better your context is, the better the machines, the LLMs are going to be in responding. So what I'll do next is start in Excalidraw and sort of go over at a high level the architecture. I think someone in the chat asked a good question about, how do you design an architecture that involves InfraNodus that is in some ways self-managing. Like that's sort of the holy grail, right? Is you have a system, an intelligent, autonomous system that has access to your information and is able to proactively provide insights on its own without necessarily needing you to poke and prod it. And in many ways, InfraNodus, as a result of needing that, I think capability has become a very core piece of my architecture. I think I always tell all my clients it's like agents powered by InfraNodus. It's like the LLMs, of course, are involved, but because of the capabilities of InfraNodus, I think just like the experience is so much better. And today, there's many different workflows, honestly, in this system that I can cover. But today, what I want to discuss is how can we capture conversation and really turn conversations into something that are self-managing, self-updating, and become a way for LLMs to interact with our consciousness, essentially? If we sort of are able to extrapolate and think about the things we say out loud as being reflective of our thoughts, then, we're not too far away from saying that suddenly LLMs, if they have access to our stream of consciousness because it's spoken out loud, have in a way access to our minds. And we can get into more, and you guys can definitely sign up on my website if you want to talk more or hit me on the Discord chat. But the process that I've implemented is I have everybody, it's about 25 plus people at the factory wearing these Claude pins. There's many different AI recording devices, but really all this pin will do is record audio. And then I have a clever prompt that I came up with that takes the transcript and turns it into a data shape. And I think it's actually worth spending a little bit of time right here in my three little parallel lanes of, to me, one of the most fundamental uh, strengths, I think is the right word, of LLMs is not even their reasoning capabilities, but their ability to structure unstructured text. I think people sometimes don't necessarily give that the value that it deserves. To just receive a mass of information and be able to use an LLM to structure it into summary. We see that all the time with our note-taking AIs, turning it into code. We see that all the time. I think most people are vibe coding these days. But one maybe underutilized thing to do is t tell the LLMs to take the unstructured text from your conversations and then turn them into a data shape, let's say like JSON or even a tabular data shape for CSV. And what that does is suddenly the words that you're saying are actual little bits, packages of data that you can then work with, like any other data from a transactional system. And when you do that, it suddenly makes them much more extensible, where you can like integrate them back into a transactional system. You can do sort of the typical data analysis on it, run them through different automations like we're going to be doing here. And yeah, this step right here of using your prompts on your transcripts to do more than just summarize or tell it to write some code is like, can you actually turn the words into a data shape? And I'll walk through an example of all of this as we go through it. But I have a clever little prompt that I came up with, turns it into a JSON format, and then I throw that into N8N, and then N8N will plug it into my Airtable, again, just a database. And then from that database, I slowly start feeding all of those statements into Infernotus, several different graphs based on, the kind of user that provided that information. And then, in some ways, I'm calling it the hive mind being a collective intelligence that contains all conversational information from every user in the organization and all of their transactions. So if we take like a step back and think about what a transaction is a history of an action performed by somebody or something. So it's like a history of all the things that we have done. Whereas a transcript is a history of all of the things that we've thought and said. And I think we're really there for the first time where any business or any person can now sort of capture both things at once, where you can both understand what someone is thinking and what they're doing. And when you have those two things together, just like the picture, the context that you can provide LLMs is very, very high quality. And in a way, they're getting a chance to really like inhabit your perspective and your reality. So when they're giving back responses, like they're very meaningful because their understanding of your, actual lived reality is quite good. Um, I know, probably pretty theoretical, and I'll go through an example just now, in just a second. But I want to give a shout out to a few different resources that have been very instrumental in helping me sort of come up with the hive mind. Of course, we have Dimitri, and Infernotus. But if you guys haven't read any of his research, at his personal site, I highly, highly, highly recommend doing so. Dimitri's been down the knowledge graph path far before LLMs became mainstream. And in a lot of ways, his research, I think, is where reality is going to go, especially with AWS and just this integration of both movement and interacting between, digital entities, like machines and humans, and how all of these things are sort of going to develop into this like very integrated, fluid, sort of ecosystem. So I definitely like if you're a big fan of Infernotus, do yourself the favor, read his research. Very eye-opening, especially when you try to understand it with the help of LLMs and Infernotus itself. Um, because he's deep. The one thing about Dimitri is like he's not a surface level guy, and all of his research gets pretty deep. But I found it to be incredibly revealing in terms of like almost having a prophet tell you what the future is going to be like. And in that same vein, invisible-machines.ai, I would highly, highly recommend people taking a look at that as well. I would say another person, Rob Wilson, he, predicted ChatGPT, and his big point is what LLMs and AI are really going to enable is for humans to move towards conversational interfaces, which we don't have to use a mouse and keyboard anymore in order to interact with our systems. He says it's going to be a very foundational shift in just our relationship with technology. And long story short, its conversation is an interface that as a species we developed over, generations, right? Thousands of years. But the mouse and keyboard and a screen is something that we've sort of like learned how to deal with over just 100 years at most. So moving back to an interface that's much more natural to us, is going to make a big difference because when you look at the population, the people that are good at using the computer is like a small set compared to the people who are not. Most people are good at conversation, but not really everybody's good at using the computer. So this book definitely worth reading. It's called Age of Invisible Machines. Version 2 of it just came out earlier this year. Huge inspiration. And then finally, visual thinking. There's another gentleman at Visual Thinking Workshop that's worth exploring as well. He, like Dimitri, uses Obsidian quite a bit, and he's really all about, when we're thinking, we really want to be able to communicate visually as well. Because when we think, like we do think in images and concepts and not just words, right, within the vacuum of our mind and being able to communicate and externalize, the images in our mind as visuals just will help with communication. So, drop a visit to my website, but if nothing else, definitely check out these other four sites here because they connect a lot of really important dots, I think, for today's day and age. And in a lot of ways, I think all three of these gentlemen are very prophetic in nature. I think they're giving us a glimpse of the future that is inevitably coming. So now what I'll do is walk through an example of this flow over here. So, I have the users recording themselves on Claude pins. At the end of the day, as part of their checkout procedure, they'll go ahead and sync them, and then my prompt will run. And what my prompt does is it creates a output like this, where you'll sort of see that it's very JSON-y, where instead of a comma, it's a semicolon, sort of separating these things. But what I'm essentially doing is taking unstructured text and distilling it into atomic units of thoughts, a statement, so some sort of complete sentence. And because I know the final place that I'm trying to put things is InfraNodus, I make the effort of saying, hey, like let's sort of pre-optimize it for dropping it into the graph. And I have a self-learning system so that as it learns more concepts and entities, etc., it adds it to the dictionary so it gets better and better at identifying entities. Um, it's not a perfect science. I think it's, again, why I need to sort of have long-term relationships with my customers is the first month you're just getting information so you can develop a dictionary of entities. And then after 3 months, you sort of like really perfected, what the key terms are, the entities and the relationships. And until then, there's no real guarantee that the value that you're getting back, the responses you're getting back from the LLMs through Infernotus are exactly what they need to be. They're going to be meaningful, but not perfect. So it definitely takes some iteration, and I don't think there's really any way to get around that because again, the system itself is sort of self-learning, but it takes time for even LLMs to sort of learn. Then this transcript here. Claude Pin specifically, the only thing you can use to interact with it is Zapier. So I just grab the transcript and drop it into Google Drive. It's the only thing I really use Zapier for, is just moving it from these devices over into Drive. And then once I have it in Drive, um, then I hit this N8N workflow. And I know it's a lot. Definitely come back to the recording to go through this. And then also ping me on the Discord server if you want to learn more. But what this trigger does at the end of every day, it pulls all of the transcripts, it checks which ones we've already sort of read, and then makes sure that we only grab the ones that we haven't dealt with, and iterates through them and turns them into a structured format like this table. So that was my point earlier about, hey, you have unstructured text, right? It's just a days long conversation. But with the good prompt and good processing, you can now turn it into a very, traditional data set where you have, hey, here's all of the statements that were said on a particular day. Um, we have to de-identify, otherwise it destroys compliance. So we really had to make sure that we're not putting individuals' names in here. But we have these different departments that they get tied to, and then the statement, and they get categorized, and you can do all sorts of things. Like the nice thing about turning it into data is you can label it in many, many different ways. And, one of the things that I mentioned is being able to visualize a statement or a thought makes that information much more accessible to a much wider range of individuals. So that's what we've tried to do here in Airtable is, in addition to the statement itself, I sort of have, Nano Banana, shout out Gemini Nano Banana for being so good at images, but I have it go and create a visual representation of that statement, especially on the factory floor. Reading comprehension and quality isn't necessarily always the highest, no fault of their own. They just live different lives than, academics, as an example. But because of how good Nano Banana is at image generation, it creates a pretty precise representation of the statement. And now, we really have a visual memory bank almost of the business that grows and grows and grows. And it allows the team, the organization itself, to sort of come in and curate its own memories. It's like, they're creating these memories for the hive mind, the collective intelligence, but they can go into the hive mind itself and, like refine its memories to be exactly what they need to be. Again, the quality of the context determines the quality of the output. So giving people the ability to go back and interact with their own memories that they've shared with the collective intelligence is really important because there's a lot of assumptions that during the transcription that LLMs can make. So having this direct feedback loop is really important. Um, then getting a little bit deeper even into the matrix, I guess, is my goal with this hive mind is to equip every one of the users with their own personal AI avatar that's connected to their individual's knowledge graph, InfraNodus graph. And as of yesterday, we actually were able to even connect them to 11 labs so that they have voice. So people define their personas. So you'll sort of see in the role summary and some of these other fields, you're doing the same usual thing where you're giving a system prompt, right? You're giving a system prompt, blah, 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 blah. And individuals are now able to essentially create their own avatars. They can get fun and create different images. They can give it a system prompt. They can tell it what departments they belong to. So that tells it what graphs it has access to, what kind of data it has access to, and then also define what its voice will be like. So now everybody in the factory floor sort of has a digital representation of themselves that is able to pull from, a knowledge base that doesn't like degrade over time, unlike human memory. And one of the biggest use cases is content gaps. Now the avatars are able to autonomously, automatically identify the gaps in the thinking of their human counterparts and then ask questions or provide ideas to bridge the gaps. And that's where InfraNodus is like moving from just a, text processing tool to more of a like mind optimizing tool because it's asking questions that gets people to think about things from a perspective that they as a human would not be able to think about because they're like in their lives. And that's really where I see, why InfraNodus is a tool that I'm not really seeing any other technology really even go down this path, where they're expediting your ability to do work, but are they actually inspiring you to be able to think better? And for a human being, as a species, like our minds and our ability to think is really what differentiates us from other people, even, but other species. And now to be augmented with a machine intelligence that can passively do that, um, is to me like it gives me goosebumps, honestly, thinking about it sometimes. And I'll even show some examples of what the very initial outcomes are like. And they make you start believing like maybe we are farther along to the future than we even anticipate. But once I have everything set up into these databases, and we know that different statements go to different departments, I run this second workflow, which is just going through my table, my database, and then organizing the different statements into the appropriate graphs. So if it's a statement about manufacturing, it goes into the manufacturing. If it's about sales, it goes into the sales graph. And that way, information that's relevant to that department ends up in that department. But if you're a individual who spans multiple departments, you just get access to multiple graphs. So it's not like you're really losing any information because the graphs are being sort of um, self-contained based on department. And it's really great, I think, to see just as people are talking about their day-to-day life, to see a graph come into picture. And like I was saying, no other vector database that I'm aware of really gives you the option to do something like this, where you're like, hey, seeing this term CNC operator is having too much of an impact on the graph as a structure. So whenever LLMs are coming in here, they're always hitting the CNC operator node and then like making decisions on how to navigate and interpret based off that. But I know like, okay, this is sort of meaningless because it's in the CNC graph. Like obviously we're always going to be talking about the CNC operator and being able to remove that from the graph. And then let's say even something like CNC router, that's something no other tool, as far as I'm aware of, and I don't know everything, no other tool allows. And if we really think about these graphs as being the knowledge structures or brains that LLMs inhabit, then curating the mind allows the quality of the output that the LLMs provide us to be really high, meaningful quality. And that's to me, if you're using vector databases, it's like, why bother like learning about the complexity of how to deal with those things? Dimitri and his team have sort of abstracted all of that for us, where you just send the data to these graphs, they do the hard work of storage and optimization. And especially with the MCP and the visual tool, you can get to be a digital brain surgeon. Like that's honestly what it feels like to me when I'm in the InfraNodus tool. I really feel like I'm, doing brain surgery on the agents that I'm building for my customers. And it's especially if you use it in the Chrome extension or in Obsidian, where you can sort of interact with it in three-dimensional space. It feels like Blade Runner. Like honestly, it's like one of the most exciting ways I think of interacting with the tool. Um, because like vision is like how humans get 90% of their information. So the fact that we have a tool that lets us visualize our mind like this is incredibly significant, I think. So now let's leave the land of technicality and go into how do we actually use this in day-to-day life. So one example is, I'm like, hey, Opus, go ahead and do an analysis on these graphs. So for my customer, their prefix is OCC. So any graphs that start with OCC or for that particular customer. And then, it comes out and it takes some time to learn how to like understand graphs and really gain information from them because like it's its own sort of discipline more than anything else. But it starts to give really meaningful insights, such as, hey, in this business, you have this one operator. None of this information is written anywhere. It all lives in his mind. And, that's something that's a huge problem for many businesses, tribal knowledge. Like all of the information about how to run your business lives in the mind of different individuals. And as a business, that's like a risk because if they leave, you literally are losing a part of the business. But now that you have the collective hive mind, everyone's information, knowledge becomes everyone else's knowledge. And the ability to share knowledge like that, to have this central repository that you can dive into using conversation at any time, incredible. We were already seeing it where, the business is at capacity. So a new hire can't just go to a seasoned operator and ask questions because there's a bunch of work to do. Now they're going to the Hive Mind, which is an InfraNodus knowledge graph, and asking, hey, how do I do this one particular process? And it'll be Claude going into InfraNodus through MCP figuring out, the different information about that topic and then coming back with an explanation. And it's able to communicate at the level of the operator, right? It can dumb itself down or smart itself up as much as needed based on that communication style. And like we are slowly getting rid of the bottleneck and risk that is tribal knowledge. And that's like a foundational change in many businesses, specifically manufacturing, where, you have these experts that have been doing it for decades. But as they start moving into retirement, a big issue is like, how are we going to address it? Hey, Gracie, come on. Oh, sorry, I have a dog that tries to be a guard dog all the time. So this was an example of how we're, analyzing the conversational data. But now let's go to the next level, which is we have conversations. Let's blend it with transactional data and then see what we can do when LLMs have access both to our thoughts and our actions. And, put this report together yesterday, coincidentally, in many ways. It seems like the universe is taking us on for a ride. But and I'll share this with you guys if anyone's interested, but I'll just have everyone notice the quality of this analysis that AI LLMs can generate in minutes on the spot, right? Like the traditional you need to have this massive pipeline in order to get your analysis, and then you have a dashboard that you're trying to make sense of what happens. I think that's very quickly not becoming a thing anymore. Now, when you want to ask a question, you ask the question, it processes the information real time, and then it gives you the graph, sure, but then it tells you like, hey, this is the kind of visualization that we're using. This is the kind of analysis that we're doing. This is what that specific technique is meant to help you understand. And it's democratizing the use of data science and like, statistical libraries and machine learning, all of these tools that exist, but are sort of hidden from the use of regular people because you need to know how those things work, but not anymore. Now it's like an LLM knows that, okay, because it's this kind of data, I should be using this kind of library to perform this kind of analysis. And now I can explain to the user, like, why it used that, what the data means, why this kind of tech analysis technique is important. And at the same time, it'll tie things back to the graph. And this is something that I'm still developing a little bit more, where it'll say, hey, this issue existed because of these actions that we recorded in the transactional system, but then tie it back to, hey, this are the things the people are saying about those actions. And one great example that already happened is an operator would complain about something about, hey, sandpaper was running low. And, it would just sort of get lost in the ether. And then a project would show up 2 days later that needed the sandpaper, but no one ordered it. So then they needed to do a rush order to get it in that day. They're just paying excess money for no reason. But now the hive mind noticed an operator say that, recognize that whenever the operator says that, 2 days later, there's always a delay on some project or work order because we ran out of sandpaper. So it proactively for the evening write-up or the morning meeting said, hey, somebody complained about sandpaper. Let's put in an order for sandpaper, and just like brought something that is in the ether of conversation that exists on any business or manufacturing floor, and then turned it into an insight that was presented to the people who could do something about it. And that's a really small, but I think, easy to understand example. But there's many other cases of that where LLMs, they're great at pattern recognition. So when they see that the same action or saying or thought leads to some sort of adverse action, when someone says something, it's able to then predict that this action is soon to follow and just bring it up as an action item or something to put in front of a decision maker. Um, and that's really powerful. If you don't need shop floor operators to go record all of their stuff on a computer and they can just talk out loud, which they're great at. They love talking out loud, but they hate using computers. You're letting people stay in the areas where they're great and letting machines stay in the areas where they're great, like on a computer doing computer things. So, this is a pretty extensive report. Actually, you'll see that it gets pretty, pretty deep. And what it's doing is it's constantly doing this dance of like looking at some data, then going back into the appropriate graphs to figure out the perspectives that are most relevant for analyzing that data, assuming those perspectives, then coming back into the data and then applying that perspective, like the CEO's perspective, the general manager's perspective, which it knows what perspectives or personas to take on because they've been very clearly defined in this Airtable with people's avatars. So the hive mind really has started to become this thing where it's its own thing, but it knows how to look at things from the appropriate perspectives. So when it's communicating back to the users, it's doing it in a way where it's actually grounded in their realities and like what they think, say, and do, which is like the biggest, one of the biggest challenges with AI and LLMs is like, it's fine that they're giving you answers, but it needs to very much be within the context of your lived reality. Otherwise, it's not actionable. Um, so yeah, that's I would say sort of the end of my presentation. I can't help smiling because I sort of, found Dimitri when I was looking for alternatives to vector databases. And then, learning more about his tool and his research, I really think Infernotus is going to be the core powering these agents that are truly thought partners. They're not just there to do executional work, but do these like very subtle, nuanced things of asking questions and coming up with ideas that fundamentally make people better thinkers. And if the quality of your thoughts and ability to think increases, like the impact it has, because what's more valuable to a human than our minds? I think it's already starting to have a huge impact at my customers, and I'm looking forward to continuing to work with Dimitri, seeing what thoughts you guys have to really flesh this out. Because I think it's a core technology. I told him before, but I think this is going to be a core technology for building really effective autonomous agents that augment and really complement human beings and are doing things to improve the quality of a human life because they're affecting the quality of our thoughts. So here's his website. I just wanted to go through these real quick. It's definitely spend the time here. Incredible, incredible knowledge to be found. Visual thinking workshop. This guy also I think very profound in his approach to using graphs and visualizing information. Invisible Machines, this book changed my life. I read this book and I quit my job because I'm like, we're just going to design for the future that this book talks about. And then if you thought any of this was interesting, feel free to make contact with the Hive Mind. I think the Hive Mind will be operational at the end of the summer. But if you have some interesting use cases that you think would be interesting to work on, please feel free to reach out. Otherwise, yeah, Dimitri, I think I'll stop talking now and hand the mic back over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Sid, for such an inspiring presentation. I started streaming it actually somewhere at the beginning of when you were explaining about how the whole stack works. So we have it also now on YouTube. If anyone wants to go through it again and check, then you can do it on our YouTube channel. And yeah, I think Sid's workflow is super, super interesting. I really love how he thinks about it, like his vision for the future, also how many elements it combines, and at the same time, how also highly practical it is. This is really, really great, and it's always really inspiring for me to see how Sid works, and I'm really excited to see how the Hive Mind is going to evolve. I think it's going to be a great product. And
I heard someone ask a question, aren't these people worried that as soon as you
yeah,
map all of their tribal knowledge in the system, they'll be fired?
yeah, let's
Um,
look at the questions actually. So this is yeah from Gregorch, and I think that there is like a few more. So maybe we can go through them, Sid.
Yeah,
Hmm.
absolutely. And that's, I think, probably the biggest concern. When I first came to the plant, and I was talking about AI stuff, honestly, nobody wanted to talk to me. Everybody was like, this guy's bad news. But now people realize that AI, if it's done well, right, is what it's doing is helping you as the individual or expert share your knowledge with the rest of the team and allow you to stay in flow state, right? Like most people that work in factories are operators, they do sort of consider themselves artists in a way. And like they just want to be working with their machines, just being in flow state day in and day out. And anytime they have to stop what they're doing and like go to a computer and like enter information over there or answer a question that could be easily answered, you're sort of like really ripping them out of their flow state, and it's more damaging to the psyche, I think, than people will acknowledge. But people have realized like, hey, this thing's updating the system for me. It helps my teammates become better because now they have access to my knowledge and I have access to their knowledge. And it really is like having a teammate that just knows everything that's going on in the business, communicates in a way that's most appropriate to you, and then just abstracts the need for you to constantly be like interacting with technology to keep everybody else up to date. And that paradigm, the gains that people have seen is, CNC operator, my roommate, Evan, he's absorbed 2 days of labor using AI and implementing these workflows. And in a factory, in a manufacturing plant, 2 days of labor that are saved every week forever from now on, that's like almost unheard of. It's like impossible to have that kind of impact. But people don't necessarily appreciate like how bad the technology and the interactions on the shop floor are because they're designed by like technical experts, but they're used by people who like don't want to really use technology or interact with it. And yeah, AI really, I think, solves that problem. But it's a valid argument. I think people really need to be conscious about how they're doing the implementation, understanding that it will have a real impact, and making sure to design for the future that it's enabling. And, if everybody in the shop is just like doing more, but in less time, it just means per hour they're getting paid more. Like you might be working less hours, but your dollars per hour is higher, so you're making more money by working less. And that's really the goal of AI, right? It's like you don't do any garbage work anymore. You just do the things that you really, as a human being, you're the only one that can do them. Um,
Yeah, Ethan actually had a question that related to these uh, transcripts which you're making, and also he actually wrote something that I really liked at some point of your presentation that gives chills. I think that's when you were describing the gaps. So, and you said right after that it also gives you chills. So you had this emotional reaction almost simultaneously when you were talking about how you can use all these tools to get these really nice insights. But he was asking about, so he's writing a great distinction between transactions and transcripts. Uh, and then he's asking, so transcripts are zero many actions. How are actions verified? Do you think that you could
yeah,
go into that?
that's a good question. And that's why if you remember in my Airtable, this statement visualization. So collecting information is easy. Making sure that that information is valuable and precise is much more difficult. And I sort of have a process where AI also goes in and constantly cleans the information, removes duplicate statements, different things like that to keep it clean and at a reasonable size. But as part of our checkout procedure, every employee takes their PIN, they sync it to the cloud, and they generate the transcript. That generally takes a few minutes. And as they're doing that, they also have a checkout procedure where they put in their timesheets, and they have a quiz. So every day, 25 different employees take a quick quiz that goes through 5 different statements, and they're presented with the statements that are relevant to their role, to their department, and they just verify that the information is accurate. So as we're collecting this information, people are getting a chance to verify it. One of the interesting things is these statements have a temporal scale, and that's like one of the more difficult things that we're trying to design for, where something, let's say it's about a process or how a machine works, right? A statement about that can last the test of time because that's truly just a fact. And once you put it in the graph, even if the statement comes up 100 more times, you don't need to keep updating that statement because it's the same statement every time. So we're now designing graphs for temporality, like understanding if a statement is just a precise fact. If it is, it gets stored in a graph that only gets bigger. Like it never removes any information because it's always factual information. And, at some point that graph will reach its maximum where its growth will start to decline rapidly because things change in a business, but the core processes, machinery, how you do things don't really change after some time. But then you have things that are like decisions that need to be made or action items, right? Where they only exist in time for maybe a week or a day. And that's sort of the next like big iteration that we have to do with our system is understanding how long a statement or an idea is fresh for, like when does it sort of expire and its relevance become meaningless? Because saying, hey, this project is due tomorrow, saying that today and then 2 weeks from now, that statement that this project is due tomorrow is just no longer valid. So you just want to like have a process to get rid of that. Um, so yeah, it's several different layers. I think someone even asked a question about perplexity computer and how all of this like gets together. And that's where system architecture is like the only answer. It's like how do you layer many complex systems on top of each other so that you suddenly have an experience that's like talking to a really intelligent human being almost. Um, and there's so many layers to it. It's like memories are not necessarily always good forever. So you need a way of like figuring out what their time fence is and like getting rid of them appropriately. And then the quality of a memory is always subject to interpretation. So now having these quizzes where multiple people get to look at a single statement and then provide their assessment on it, that's, I think, the best answer we've come up with on like how do you know that a particular statement is precise is to like give it back to the people who made those statements from multiple perspectives and then have them rate it. And if it has a high enough score, it's allowed to go into the memory bank, or it needs to just like continuously be evaluated until it makes it. But yeah, I think that's definitely one of the things that is going to be the hardest part of this project is collecting these transcripts super easy, processing them and then storing them appropriately is much more difficult. But more and more research is continuously coming out on like how to deal with stuff like this.
Yeah, actually, Tom was also writing that conversational intelligence. So he actually wrote great work, Sid, and then he wrote conversational intelligence has always had so much friction, both from the standpoint of input and processing until now. Then using InfraNodus to quickly find and focus the LLM is a great use case. And then we had also kind of like a comment or a question from Lars as well, where he was asking about speaking about databases. Is this example, it is row-based, sheets, and Airtable. I'm curious about the perspective of using graph-based databases for this. Bigger benefits or just a technicality?
I think that's like it's an amazing question because it's something that we spoke to Dimitri about, my team and I did, and something we're actively sort of dealing with internally is I think if you were to say infinite resources and what's the best answer, I think a graph DB just makes a lot of sense because you can store such nuanced information within that structure that maybe you can't have in a relational database. But they're just very, very expensive graph databases. Like they're just really expensive. And because of that, our long-term goal is to generate enough value that the customer is willing to invest in a graph database because the structures that you can create, I think for LLMs to navigate are just much more efficient when they're in a graph structure compared to relational. But in terms of you don't have any of this stuff and you're just trying to get started and like leverage, um, tabular is more than enough. I think storing it tabular and then at runtime turning it into a graph. Dimitri sort of explained like in his backend, that's sort of how they're doing it in Infernotus because they just realized like putting it into a graph DB using Neo4j, it's just the cost is so prohibitively high unless you're just like a massive enterprise that you can just throw cash at it. And that should, I think, that should wait until you've like reached the full volume of using relational tabular structures to get data and value out of, and then eventually move into graphs. Like my goal is eventually to be able to, I think, get to graph DBs because you can capture conversations, transactions across all types of systems, all in one superstructure. But it takes time to like define the structure because you need to sort of define all of the relationships between everything, the nodes, the edges. So I would say the aspirational pie in the sky North Star is to move towards a graph database, but the yellow brick road is probably just PostgreSQL until we get there. Is at least my thoughts right now.
Yeah, I might have something to add here because, in fact, like it doesn't really matter what you use as long as you get what you need. And at the moment, it's actually quite possible to get the same kind of quality of insights using relational databases as well, vector databases. And in the end, it's about what affordances the tool provides. So you have a let's say InfraNodus itself, it used to run on a graph database actually on Neo4j. And then at some point, we just encountered such scalability issues that even the team from Neo4j couldn't help us with, that we had to actually switch to PostgreSQL. But in fact, it's great because then it's very easy, was very easy to then build in all these vector database functionalities when AI became more important because I've been building it since like 2010, so it wasn't there from the beginning. But like in the end, to have a really good basic system that has worked for years, like Postgres, the efficiency that it provides, and then you build an interface on top, like InfraNodus, that can actually generate knowledge graphs, query all the data. It's also highly flexible because, look, if you build a knowledge graph based on a certain principle or ontology, right? Like if you want to rebuild it, you have to run everything once again. And what's great when you use traditional databases is that you can just store your text, and then this application layer on top will be the one that you use to generate your knowledge graphs in different ways. Like at one point, you might decide that you want to, for example, use different criteria for the connections or extract different kind of knowledge. If you have a graph database, you will have to rebuild the whole thing from scratch, and it's going to be a lot of work. Also, you will be using a lot of tokens to do it because in Neo4j, when you want to generate something uh, with AI, it's crazy how much actually tokens it consumes. But if you have a relational database, then you can build an application layer on top that will solve your problem, and then you will be good with it. So I haven't yet encountered a case where you would really need the graph database for this, and where a relational database, a vector database, couldn't solve it. And then, yeah, Lars is writing also. I was hoping tools like InfraNodus could help design such databases, but I think it is good that there is no problem bridging it into a traditional database. Yeah, that's what
It
we
keeps the
were.
cost low, and like as we all know, costs are always the things that prevent businesses from making progress. So
Hmm.
it's, augmenting with AI, even just a little bit of it adds so much value that for me, it's like, okay, hey, we can do all this R&D sort of experimental stuff down the road once we've used the value generation from using simpler tools and techniques and architectures to like generate the ROI that let us play around a little bit more. But,
Hmm.
but yeah, I think stay simple. Like I think complexity is the enemy in many ways. Simplicity and just like really well thought out architectures will get you more than far enough, just because the models themselves are so intelligent inherently.
And also, Lars was asking actually to get an idea about scale, how many statements or nodes like this would be generated from 1 hour educational video. Do you have a quick answer to that? Sid?
Yeah, so if it's an educational video, chances are every single state, every word that's being shared in that will be meaningful. But typically, of an 8 hour conversation over the course of a day, people are generating on average, I would say about 100 statements, which is like surprising, right? That after 8 hours of recordings, you're getting 100 statements. But one, people aren't always talking throughout the day. People are also making comments about personal lives, just different things that is just conversation. But when you really distill it to like how many complete thoughts are being communicated by an average operator over the course of a day, that's like business related. Yeah, I think I was surprised to see it was 100. But then, now you're multiplying that by 25, so you're at 2,500, and so you're adding 2,500 statements every day. It is making our database get pretty big pretty quickly, and that's why we're focusing a lot on curation. Again, when you're working with PostgreSQL databases, you can handle millions of rows without any problem. So the number of statements I don't think is ever going to be the problem. Like storage is not a huge issue anymore these days. It's more, okay, hey, we want to make sure that the quality of these statements that we provide to the LLMs when they traverse the graph is as high quality as possible. So the curation part of it is proving to be the much bigger challenge than storage, I would say.
Nice. Yeah, Lars is saying that his use case is about personal knowledge management and pipelines, so a lot of that is educational material. All right.
Yeah, for
Well,
that,
go on,
you might
Sid.
be at 250 statements. I mean, it depends on how fast you talk, et cetera, et cetera.
Hmm.
But yeah, when you're educational, almost every single, statement you're making is going to be a valuable statement. So just the concentration will be higher.
Yeah. Well, all right. So let me just share one last poll that we have on how you use Infernotus, whether you use it for personal use or for business use, because Lars was mentioning that he uses it for personal knowledge. So I wonder how people are actually using it. And I think that we will stop around here. It's been already more than 1 hour and a half, so it's great that people stayed with us for so long. I think that Sid's presentation was super interesting. Also, the live broadcast of that webinar starts where Sid is demonstrating his workflow, so that's great because usually when you have videos, then people kind of stop watching after the first 10 minutes, but I'm glad that this one will be available from your presentation, Sid, so people can really get into it directly. And then I will upload the full version of the webinar on our other channel. So as a participant, you will receive an email after this session with a little survey that we would ask you to also fill out to just tell us how useful you found it. And also if you have any feedback, please let us know. Like for instance, this feedback we had that maybe the data that I did the demonstration on could be something a little bit more general that everyone can get into. So if you have any other ideas or maybe criticism, also please let us know. I will be very curious to hear and I will pass it on also to Sid. And yeah, thank you so much for joining. Thank you for staying with us. Also, great comments, as always, very thoughtful, and always good to get positive feedback as well from everyone. And I appreciate that, that you are really also thinking about the different ways of how we can use these tools for business use and for personal use, for inspiration. And it's great to see so many great people also joining in and kind of like sharing how they're using the tools as well.
Yeah.
And if any of you ever wants to also participate in a webinar like this, you're very much welcome. I would be very happy to have you on if you want to demonstrate some of your workflows, how you use Infernotus and other tools. That's always very inspiring to see. So if you would like to join in, just write to me and I will be happy to arrange something with you. And if you want to contact Sid, you have the details. I will also have them in the description of the webinar, so you can easily also uh, write to him. And also, I have a link to our Discord channel on our chat. And because we will have both Sid's presentation and the full webinar available online, I will put some time codes on the full version. And then you will be able to also see how to use specific features of the MCP tools. And of course, there are more videos on this topic as well. So if you want to use those, let us know. And now I'm gonna share the results of the poll that we have. So mainly people actually use it for personal use, but 1/3 said that they don't use Infernotus. So here I'm gonna share it so you can see. So half of the people personal use, 13% for business use, and then 1/3 don't use InfraNodus at all. So yeah, this is kind of like the outline, and I hope that this presentation of Sid will also demonstrate how you can use it in business as well. And the search optimization use case as well that I showed at the beginning of the webinar is also touching on the business use case when you need to create content and you want to expose it to a wider audience. Well, so I thank everyone for taking part in the webinar. Thank you, Sid, so much for joining in and sharing your amazing workflow. Was really
No, thank
great.
you, Dimitri. You're the one who enabled us all with the tool. So yeah, round of applause to Dimitri because he's been doing it way before ChatGPT blew everybody's mind. That's what I'm like really impressed with is like you were on this track way before I think any of us. So yeah, really amazing.
Thank you. Well, so thanks to everyone, to all the participants. Thank you for your time, for being there, for sharing your questions and comments and feedback. And we'll be in touch again. Let me know also the topics that you would like me to explore in the future. And any comments or wishes, just drop me an email. Always happy to talk to you all. All right. Have a great day, evening,
You
wherever
guys.
you are. Bye bye.